microphones always on, or is there any on?
I do like the acoustics. Sounds much better.
I think it sounds a lot better.
There you go.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. David, good? All right,
Okay.
good. We had some technical difficulties. Now we're back. Don, would you like to go through that
Yeah.
process again?
Just for the record, before we went online or streaming, the council elected as is required to do under Rule 22 of council, when meeting as a committee of the whole, the usual presiding officer, that would be me, the mayor, is not to preside over the committee of the whole. So council chose our vice mayor, Mr. Bessel, to be the presiding official, and I now officially turn the metaphorical gavel over to him.
Thank you, Don. The first order of business in our meeting is the public comment section. We have 3 individuals who've requested to speak. I don't know if there's any particular order I have to follow for ICRC. Okay, so we will start with Ms. Kilgore.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much for allowing me a forum. I appreciate that very much. I also appreciate the time and efforts that you all are putting into re-examining the rules of council, how they align with the Ohio Revised Code. I know that it's extra work, but again, I appreciate the fact that that council and the mayor is willing to do this to forego the village going through this kind of issue in the future. So again, thank you very much, and I am done. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Kilgore. And I neglected to say before that because of the nature of the meeting and the amount of discussion that might take place amongst council people, we are limiting comments to 2 minutes per person. And Ms. Kilgore, I do appreciate your brevity. The next person that will speak is Mrs. Ewing.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I certainly ditto everything that Jenny Kilgore said. Thank you very much for meeting in full council to discuss our update and clarification maybe of our guidelines. I have a couple of things that I thought maybe I didn't see on the agenda, and I'll be very brief. The first is I would like to get a clarification of the words that are used, quote, other helpful governmental information, and also the clarification of, quote, important governmental information. They're listed in the Friday newsletter guidelines right now, and the important governmental information is listed for someone who wants to send something out as an exception to the rule on the Friday newsletter. So I would like to see some examples of what that actually entails. It's kind of a catch-all phrase, and I've heard it mentioned several times in a couple of other council meetings. The next thing I would like is I believe at the August 31st meeting, Mayor Lofty mentioned that we really did not have a guideline on securing or contacting the media outside the community. So I would like a little bit more information on that, on who has the authority to do that and with whose approval for that to take place. So just a little bit more information on contacting the media outside the community. Thank you again, gentlemen, and Nancy, for putting in the time and effort on this. I think there'll be a big payoff in the end. Clarification is always a good thing. So thank you very much. I'm all finished.
Thank you, Ms. Ewing. And our last speaker is Ms. Rogers.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me the time to speak. And I just want to thank all of you for the efforts that you're putting forward to lend clarity to the council rules and the functioning of village government. It's an important effort that you're putting forth today. I concur with Jenny's statements as well as Linda Ewing's statements on looking forward to that clarity. Those specific words, governmental importance and important governmental information, are words that need to be clarified. I look forward to having those clarified so that we can erase the subjectivity in the rules as they stand presently. And I'm going to cede the rest of my time so you gentlemen and lady can move forward with the work you need to do today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. And with that section now, public comment complete, we move on to the business section of the meeting. And I would just like to make a brief statement and maybe lay out a method by which this would proceed. The agenda calls for discussion concerning usage of titles in village communications by village officials and employees. It is followed by 3 bullet points that coincide with that: usage of titles by village officials and employees, usage of village communications, broadly circulated emails, newsletters, etc., council review of village email guidelines. And then there is a 4th that we will take on later that is separate but similar, but the change of name of Laws, Claims, and Miscellaneous Committee to Laws, Claims Committee. This was brought up previously by the mayor in a prior meeting, and it is something that I think most of council agrees with because it better defines the role of that committee. So to start with the first 3 and just our overview of these rules, I just mentioned why council is here today. Along with just look at and review in general how council persons work within the stated rules that we have, and along with that, to the extent that we can, the Ohio Revised Code. It's important to note that council in this meeting will discuss and consider these matters, and the communications by council and the general work of village council and village officials. Recent communications about race relations is a very important issue, but that issue has been caught up in the question of council communication and rules of council, and it's created confusion on its own. It is very important to note that the subject of race relations is a separate matter from our current review today of the rules of council. With respect to discussion about race and race relations and improvements that can be made, those are welcome in this community. I understand discussions are continuing, and I and others have faith that improvements that can be made will be made through productive, inclusive, and honest discussion and understanding. One thing has been clear by many comments that people in the community have already made is that every person who spoke on this matter that I have heard in public or talked to in private agrees that racism is not a good thing and that there's no place for racism in this community. The one word of advice I would have, whether you want to hear it or not, when it comes to the good people who are trying to make improvements in our community in this way through these dialogue and discussions, as you endeavor to make your points heard and to be understood by other people, it's important to seek first to understand. So that's enough about that. Back to the agenda for this meeting. We've received very good information and feedback from many residents. Individual council people have their own thoughts on the matter of council rules and communications by village officials. And they've conducted research and they've listened to what other people have had to say. We will look at our existing policies and rules and other information and determine if additional clarification or changes are needed today. And it's my goal by the end of the meeting that if there are additional changes, that we will have direction on what those are and can move forward with those. I'll ask each council person to give their opinions and suggestions on this matter, looking at all three of the points, the first points, and anything additional that they feel affects that. Bearing in mind that we have a total of an hour, I will say in advance, though, that if the Finance Committee has to move back, we'll move it back. Okay. I will kind of start with my thoughts, and I'll keep it very general and brief, and then we'll move down the line through the other council people and the mayor. As far as I can tell, our Rule 9 of council talks about council people working through committees. And it gives guidance on how that work proceeds. And that the work by the committees is at the behest of council and the mayor, I'm paraphrasing, and that work is done and then it feeds back up through council. To me, it follows simply then that communications should reflect that work when communications come from a council person. This, following this sort of a guideline would minimize confusion when communications are made as to whether it's an individual's opinion, council's opinion, or the village's opinion. And it would truly then reflect the business and work of the village council. And if the communication came from a resident, either identified as a resident or conversely not identified as a council person, if it was not the work of council or their own, in other words, their own work, if they don't use a council title, then it's very clear where that communication is coming from. Regarding newsletters and other types of communication, I think we have some rules in place. These communications are about village business, official village communications, and then there are other communications that can come from various entities such as schools, our library, or about community events. And I think the common thread here is that these community events are open to all and everyone is welcome to participate and attend. I think that's a good start. Whether we need more or further clarification there, I'm not sure, but I'd like to hear from everyone else. Communications to the media, just for consistency's sake, I think need to go directly from the village office. In this meeting, I've kind of stated some general thoughts that I have that sort of make up my opinion and view on this matter. I think all of us need to express their own opinions and views. Everybody have an open mind, and let's get to the best solution that we can here. I'd like to kind of work down the line from the most senior people down to the most junior people. So starting with Alan.
Okay. The one thing going over the rules of council, there is no rule of how the council member rule. There is no rule of the council member's responsibility. If you'll look, the closest thing that comes to that is rule number 9, but that's a committee responsibility. That is not a rule of a councilman or a councilwoman. I think that we need to clarify the fact that, if a councilman holds a public meeting, there should be some kind of a, what would I say, that would be a disclaimer that, even all these television programs or whatever say, the opinions expressed on this is not necessarily the opinion of the council or the village or any of the members. So there needs to be something added to our village, I think, this is my opinion, to our village rules of council that actually govern how a councilman or woman would, the responsibility to the other council, the responsibility they have to the community, and making sure that there is no gray line of when we speak as using our title as council, councilman, councilwoman, that there is no gray line, gray area that could be construed as any more than the single person's opinion. And that, I think we could do very easily with an addition of a rule. And that way we could clear a lot of this up in a heartbeat. Also, I believe that Linda Ewing said that the clarification of these rules is critical, and I don't think we're going to get it done in an hour. And I would suggest that we take this hour, get everybody's opinion on paper, and then maybe reconvene this committee of the whole after we have a chance to share our thoughts and have someone who, beyond my talent, to wordsmith something that we could all agree to and add that to our rules of council. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Maseko.
I, Alan, agree with you 100%. This may be a first, but I
Oh, yeah.
agree with you. That there does need to be a new section on responsibilities, personal responsibilities. It's a matter of accountability. We need to have that. And I think this is where Ms. Ryan needs to come in and to weigh in. But within that, the responsibilities of the council member, and we have the subsections here, the use of titles and the use of the village communications. To not do this opens us up to what we have experienced recently, the appearance of government sanction when there was none. While the event in question was entirely useful and appropriate and a discussion the type that went on is quite valuable. It's the process that got us there, or that got the discussion there. That is a question. It's confusing, the representation using the title. The representation is confusing at best, and at worst, it appears to be a misuse of position, and we don't want anything like that. Again, it's a matter of accountability. So I would propose, I like your idea. I think we get Ms. Ryan to help us with the verbiage that clarifies when a title can be used by village officials and employees, when it can be used, and the responsibility of the double checking of the checking of the use of that. There has to be some mechanism that allows us to follow that through the process. The other part of this, in my mind, is not only the use of village communications with the title, but all external communication. Who has the authority to speak for the village? Who has the authority to contact local TV stations and request coverage and make that request over the official title, person's official title? That's critical as far as I'm concerned. And that would extend to print, broadcast, and electronic communications, as well as the use of internal village communications. I think that's my pitch.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Maseko. We'll go to Jeff Bays-Smith.
Thank you. I'm going to take this off so I'm not quite as muffled as I may be. One of the issues I think about use of the,
Jeff, can you speak into your microphone?
I'm sorry, I'll move it closer.
Yes.
Is that working
Much better.
That's good.
Thank you. One of the issues is the fact that the use of the newsletter and the email, the mailing lists if available to one organization, then it needs to be available to all. And if there is a message from one position, political or otherwise, then contrary opinions need to be available and publicized with the same technology and capabilities. And we are all often reminded to protect our own email contacts lists. Don't share them because they can become possessed by malware or by sales efforts that you don't intend. Yet, interestingly enough, in the rules of council, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the word email does not appear. Perhaps it's a technology that didn't exist in 2014, but certainly the availability to that database should be limited, and who has availability to it should be better defined, as has already been mentioned. I think there are many points that need further discussion, as was mentioned, and it might be better to cover this at a later meeting. But those are my thoughts at the moment. It should the access to the files, the data, and to the publications, excuse me, should be restricted appropriately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bay-Smith. Mr. Kryler.
My two concerns are at the last council meeting, Ms. Duke asked me to watch the two laws committee meetings that are on the ICRC, because I was not on council at that point. And going back to what Alan said, the first bullet point under Rule 9 for what a committee shall do, the first bullet is follow council direction and matters referred to it. So when I was watching the June 23rd Laws Committee meeting, Ms. Duke, Councilwoman Duke, started talking about working with the Christ Church on the racism issue, and her quote, I wrote this down, was Ms. Duke said, quote, taking it on my own as a councilwoman. And then Nancy asked to clarify who was going to be sponsoring the event, and she said Christ Church. And then she said, quote, I have not presented any formal request for action by council. So my concern watching that, and then there was no vote. It was about a 40-minute meeting, I guess. There was no vote at the end. But my question to myself was, okay, that's completely polar opposite to what this first bullet point says. Follow council direction and matters referred to it. So she said she was taking it on her own. And there was no pushback on that. So then fast forward 3 days later was the June 26 email, the Hello Neighbor email. And so that, I'm sure we're going to talk about that, Vice Mayor, but the rules of the email, the Friday night email is what I call it. Full disclosure, I'm a session member, a board member of our Presbyterian church here in town. And the Friday night email, we can mention the pancake breakfast that we do every January, but we could not mention that we were moving outside for the summer. So, you can sort of see that if you really look at the email rules, the email policy, we had some upset church members, but I can see where that is, where that would lie in the rule. But I don't see how you could send an email talking about how we should further dismantle racism in Glendale. So for me, this is what I think we need to tighten up going forward, that the gray matter needs to really be more cut and dry. And I don't know if that's a next meeting to discuss that, or if we're going to do that this afternoon.
Okay. Thank you. Before I get your thoughts, Mr. Mayor, is Kathy Ryan on now?
I am.
Okay, so you're hearing this and you can help guide us as we begin further discussion then?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Mayor. do you have-
Mr.
I would
Chair?
invite Mr. Beaugrand.
Oh, Mr. Beaugrand?
I will yield my time to Mr. Beaugrand.
Yeah, thank you. And mainly because we are elected officials, Becky, Terrell, and myself, and this also applies to us. So I like everything that was said already. The piece about the use of title by village officials, I think that's a very important piece to discuss because as one of the members mentioned earlier, we all have a role and responsibility that may not be clearly delineated in any of our documents. As the fiscal officer, I have a responsibility to council to report on specific matters. So that is my role and responsibility. There may be times where, as the treasurer, I may not be in support of where council is going with a specific budget proposal or taxation to that matter and so forth. If I were to address the broader community, not using village document or email system, but my own personal mailing or the media, there is a certain, I think, accountability that I have as being elected a specific member of the council group, that if I feel that where council is going is counter to my own personal idea, I can share that with council. If I disagree with council, council will vote on the direction that the village will follow. If I'm approached by the media around a specific item, I can clarify that I am the treasurer. I do not agree with council, but council ultimately makes the decision on what we have to follow. So that goes to the use of titles and how we communicate with outside bodies. Because the title is something that's earned. Basically, the voters provided that to us, and we can use that in that capacity. But we have to be very distinct that we cannot use that title to represent the view of the village. It could be my view, but not the views of the village. Council ultimately provides a direction that the village will follow. So that's the point.
Very, very good point. Thank you, Mr. Beaugrand. While we're headed in that direction, Ms. Terrell, is there anything you'd like to add?
One area of clarification I think we need is how does council respond to items on social media? So there are many Facebook groups, potentially Instagram groups and other things out there. And there's discussions, as we know, about what's happening in the village, and there's questions. And I'm not sure if, as a resident, I'm a member, I'm as an elected official hesitant to respond to anything because I fear what that projects. Because it would not come across as me as a person versus me as an official. So I think we need to clarify who should respond, because many of the items should be responded to. It's just a matter of who needs to do it and who has the authority for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So what I heard was there are two things. One is whether or not you're responding as an individual versus responding as the clerk or the treasurer or council person. And then if there's need for response to one of those things, who has the authority to do so?
Correct.
Or you could be like me and just ignore all the Facebook, snap
We could,
face, whatever. Okay, got it. And that's a very good point. I didn't even think of that. Is there more you'd like to add, Mr. Mayor?
There is. Just to kind of frame the issue as I've framed it, there's a balance that we're trying to strike here. We are trying to strike a balance between a council person effectively carrying out the mandate that and responsibility that they have received from the voters who put them in the seat, or in some cases, those who appointed them. But the point is, there is a responsibility there to communicate, to tell them about their views, to tell them what they think, even about things that might, in my opinion, it might not be before council. I think we can all think of examples of political leaders who maybe are in Congress or in the state legislature, and they will sometimes have an idea that they want to raise with the legislative body, and they will bring it up to constituents. They will ask, what do you think of this? What do you think? and they will get feedback, and maybe they'll give up on the idea entirely. Maybe they'll take it forward. I think that's a healthy process. Now, by the same token, there needs to be some way of avoiding people interpreting what they're being told as the views of anyone other than the individual legislator who is saying them. And so where there is a legislature is talking about something that is not at that time before the council or a committee, I think a disclaimer such as Alan suggested is the appropriate cure. And I know from my time when I was in Washington, D.C., working for the federal government, anytime you went out and made a speech, you had a rather dense paragraph at the beginning, which I'm sure we can improve upon, to the effect that the views of the speaker are only those views of that person. They do not necessarily represent the views of others, including the agency or legislative body with whom this person is a member. So, I mean, I think that is to me, the logical approach here. We need, I think, to be very careful in restricting the ability of council members to represent their constituents, but also to represent who they are. There's no question that when they're talking, in many cases, there's no question that they are members of council. And they are saying, I'm a member, that everybody knows it, and they wouldn't be having this meeting if they weren't. So I don't favor a restriction on the use of a title, except in extraordinary circumstances, which I can't think of one right now, but they're probably there somehow. So my thought is we want to approach this in the way that is the least restrictive way of achieving the important purpose of council. And I think in nearly all cases that I can imagine, a disclaimer is the way to do that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Lofty. Okay, any further comments before we start to sum up and bring this together?
Because what Mr. Bessel said and what the mayor said, it triggered something. It's that extraordinary circumstance that you mentioned. And what I'm thinking about is the specifically inviting coverage by external media using your official title. The appropriateness of that. Inviting, not responding, as Mike was talking about. Mm-hmm. That's one side of it. It's entirely different to seek coverage of an event using your title. Okay.
Okay. I could see where that is two different things. Very good. Then I would like to hear, if we could, from Ms. Ryan regarding something that Don alluded to, which is, are there circumstances where it's inappropriate for restrictions to be placed on an individual to speak as a council person or within the realm of their own title? And I guess to try to frame it, one easy thing we could do is to say, and I'm not saying this is correct, I'm just trying to kind of frame it. You don't use a council title, you don't communicate as a council person unless you're talking about official council business. There have been a couple of examples cited where that could happen and it's not official council business. In that circumstance, I'm fine as Councilman Bessel to say, hey, look, this is just Bessel, the individual, who wants to say this or who wants to promote this. I'm fine with that. So if the disclaimer is another way to do it, where if you do use your title, then you put a disclaimer front and center that this does not represent the views or the opinion of the Village of Glendale. However, I, as this person, believe in this. One other piece of this could be viewed as not just expressing your opinion or ideas, but actually organizing a meeting that's a private meeting and then using your title or your position to communicate that out? And is that even something different than just a small meeting with someone or a meeting with someone on the street, or the idea of even campaigning where you're house to house saying, I believe in free beer for all? So Kathy, can you help guide us a little bit here? What can and cannot be done, or what should and should not be done?
Sure. I think what the mayor alluded to and Mr. Howeller with the disclaimer was an excellent example. If you are an elected official, you still retain your First Amendment rights to free speech, but the line lies where there is confusion about the message and the source of it. And so to the extent that you can allow an individual to still say what they're always going to be allowed to say, which is, hey, by the way, I'm on Glendale Village Council. You can't tell them you can't say that, but you can say we have a policy that prevents in the least restrictive way possible, that provides a vehicle by which the clarification of the source of the message comes from. So it's just one of those things where you have to be very careful to strike the balance between effectuating the policy that prevents confusion, prevents any kind of things to be misleading as they relate to the village, but also preserves everybody's ability to say who they are and what their ideas are. And obviously that's a difficult policy to effectuate, but it's routinely done in communities. The social media policies, general media policies, email usage policies, these are things that are in effect in communities, and there's no reason why Glendale cannot do that as well, taking into consideration both the interests of the elected officials and their own rights, as well as the ability of the village to efficiently and effectively carry out its own business.
Okay, I'm writing. Bear with me a minute. Okay, can you think, Kathy, of a time when it would be inappropriate and the village would be within its rights to demand that a village official not use their title?
I don't have it in front of me right now, but there is very specific kind of case law that says when XYZ happens relating to, again, the effectiveness and efficiency of carrying out the municipal business, where certain things would cross the line. And I can certainly provide that as a guidepost for the council members within the draft. And whether council wants a policy to have kind of just that legal standard in there as the limit, or they want to come up with what they think or contemplate to be the types of situations where that would be, that could certainly go either way, or maybe provide or include rather a combination of both that standard and some examples that are definitely examples of that standard. So that's something that there is that standard to go by, and that I believe the village in enacting the policy would be, I think that would be the way to go as far as not crossing a line into overly limiting the speech of individuals. And this goes for both employees and elected officials. The law doesn't distinguish between the two when it comes to that particular standard.
Okay, I understand. So when it's a situation so that it makes it difficult for the organization to conduct its business, that's kind of a guidepost that in that event, there could be a demand to cease.
Yes.
Okay, and I won't go any further than that. I don't think there needs to be any further than that at this time. At the risk of sounding naive, and then I'll let it go, is I sometimes try to apply the common sense approach, where I think it behooves all of us on council that if we're in a situation and we begin to see major disruption, or divisions in the village, or a lot of ruckus being caused that is inappropriate or creates difficulty or is bad for the village. I think all of us here want to do what's good for the village and promote the village welfare. And so, again, I may be naive, but the common sense approach to me is that when that begins to occur, you stop. And I'll let that just go right there. Go ahead, Al.
Okay, let's move this on. I think that we seem to all be in agreement that we need to have a revision or a new rule on council actions. Could I suggest that we end this meeting and allow Kathy to show us in the next meeting that we have reconvened this meeting of the whole for this purpose, and give us some examples or some words that we can start to look at and say, okay, this is appropriate and this is how we should go forward. I also wish that Mrs. Duke was here. Her input is valuable also. And so I would say I would like to let's take it upon ourselves to continue this meeting in a future time and let Kathy have some time to come up with something and work with yourself as the committee chair of this committee of the whole, and with Mayor Lofty, and then let's come up with some councilwomen rules, and let's add those to our rules of council as soon as we can do that, and then let's move forward.
I like that idea. I'd like to sum up just a little bit more than that, if we can. So, I'm gonna say what I think I heard, and then we'll make sure that I had my ears open. What I'm getting from our discussion is what Alan has said. We seem to be coalescing around a couple of ideas here. In order for us to effectively write any type of policy changes, we will need help from the solicitor. And we don't want to make the sausage right here. Let's do that and then bring it back. However, one of the main points is, and we don't have to answer who right now, but we can put who we think and then who we think not. Communications with outside media, whether it be broadcast, radio, newsprint, whatever. It sounds like we think that needs to come from a central point, and that there needs to be someone or some couple of people identified who will make those contacts with media.
When speaking for the village.
When speaking for the village. So media.
Isn't that the mayor's task?
I think it is, and that's the next question. So what I would say is those things in general would come from the administrator or the mayor. Does that make sense? Is there ever, I'm going to say this as a broad statement. Council legislates, the legislation typically, from what I have seen in 25 years here, is dispensed then through either the village administrator or the mayor. Council very seldom ever communicates that legislation out. So I think that can follow the same with typical village communications, is that communication with the outside media would come through the mayor or through the village administrator. So
I'd like to break in on that. I'm sorry, but
sure.
I guess I struggle a little bit with, I mean, in principle, I'm with you that if a communication is representing the village, then it should come from the mayor or the administrator, the administration of the village, really. And I get that. But let's face it, I mean, if a council person wants to generate media coverage for some cause or something that they feel strongly about, and they make it very clear that they are acting on their own their own behalf. Yes, they are a council member, but no, they're not speaking for the village. I don't think we can stop that.
No.
Mr. Mayor, would you, under that circumstance you just described, would the use of the title be appropriate
Yes,
in your mind?
because that's who they are. I mean,
Yes.
they have a title, as long as they make it clear that they are not representing the village, that they're not representing the government of the village. I think it's like, whether it's a media communication or a communication as to a speech or a talk to people at a group or something, it's all about who are they representing. And as long as they make it clear they're representing their own views and not necessarily those of the village, I don't know that we can stop them.
And still using official title?
Yes.
Yes. No. It goes back to my point about everyone that's elected or appointed, that title stays until they're no longer in office. But if they make the disclaimer at the beginning of the discussion with whatever news media or outlet or whatever, I think they're free to use the title. They're free to discuss whatever they want, as long as they point out it does not represent the view of council.
Are we talking only external media or press, or are we talking Glendale communications?
You're right. Those are two completely different subjects, because external media, you communicate with them, and whatever you say, if it interests them, then they send a reporter and a camera team out, or a reporter with a notepad, and they interview you. In our media, in our email and newsletter, we have absolute control over that. We have some guidelines there that it's been suggested, I think, with a good point. They probably need to be clarified and tightened up a little bit in their definition. One key definition that we're going to have to come up with is, if we're going to say only village business is going to be communicated by in the newsletter in terms of governmental work. Now, obviously, you have nonprofits and you have some businesses that, they have different guidelines. But if we're going to say only village business, then we have to define village business. Is it something that is properly pending before council and a committee, or and how do we know it's pending? Does it have a motion and a second? Or is it just that 2 out of the 3 members of the committee say, yeah, we have accepted this? Or let's say they just got a referral from the mayor or from council. Here's an issue. Committee, you go figure out what to do about it. Now, the committee that's governmental business to me. And that's something that would be perfectly appropriate to be in our newsletter.
Let me go back to media, though. You can tell the media that if you're on television, you say, well, this is my opinion and not necessarily that of the council. And they don't put that on their report. It looks as if this is council business. So I don't know how you control what the media, the disclaimer that the media needs to go with as a councilman. If I'm given a television, and this has happened to me, gave a lot of talk, gave a good interview, and when it was over, they printed what they wanted to say, not what I did say, and they used my words to really make it look their own way, and that's what we got to stop.
I know the feeling.
Yes, you sure do.
As you said, you cannot control the news media.
But that's why, if someone's going to give a news report, it should come to the mayor's office and to the city manager, and the decisions made by them have to be used so it's not detrimental to our community.
Only if it represents.
You can't control the media, and that's why it's so dangerous to give interviews, and especially to invite them to come in and give an interview. I mean, that's suicide. that's that they will print, or they will put out on there whatever their opinion is of what the story was. So you got to be careful with that, and that's one of the things we got to touch. Yes, please. On this.
Could I get specific on this? When Councilwoman Duke invited and requested coverage of a private event. And she requested this coverage of a local TV station using her title. Mr. Mayor, do you know if anyone in the village offices, any member of council was aware of this invitation extended for coverage?
Well, I found out about it about an hour before the interview.
So the
If
answer
that
is no.
helps.
The answer is no.
The answer is no.
So, but I don't, okay. I did not, they did not have to tie me up and drag me to do the interview. I felt like, wasn't happy about it. Wasn't something I look forward to, but I felt like I should speak because of my position.
But the question is, was that an appropriate use of the title? Was that an appropriate action for an elected official to take that step, suggesting that it reflected the support of the village?
Well, yeah, but turning the question around, what are you going to do about it? I mean, this is the problem.
What will you do about it? And we heard that already. What you can do about it to help the village as a whole, the entire village, because you can't control the media, is that you have a policy that basically states that persons communicating outside with outside media should go through the village office to do so, and at least make the village office aware of what they'd like to do. And then I think, with respect to all of council, the entire village and its staff, that you are cautious about what you communicate, and you make sure that it's something that is within the already village business that's already ongoing, not something that's new, not something that is potentially controversial, presented as though that it could be interpreted that that is an opinion of the village of Glendale. I think the only way to control it is to bring it through the village office. I may not be saying that right,
Well,
but I think, again, I'm going to fall back to the idea that it's, we have a governmental body here. We're doing the best that we can to work together and try to move our village forward and keep it a strong community. We've had an event that's divided us, and it's unfortunate that it has. I wish it hadn't. We've had that event. That's part of the reason we've been brought together here to study how we can prevent some of these things from happening again. I think it's a very simple request and a very simple policy, and I don't think it restricts anyone to say that if you want to communicate with the media, you bring that through the village office. And there are people within the village office that handle that. That's a good, easy first step. I don't see any need for an individual to contact the media about an idea that they have that's not a village accepted idea or not village business. I don't see any need for anyone to go to the media about something like that unless they're going as an individual. And that may carry that title of council when they go as an individual, but you don't have to use the title. And that's kind of where I land on
At
it.
the very least, there's a professional courtesy that would suggest that you would have been contacted.
I'm perfectly willing to go with professional courtesy and good practice. And these are things that the village thinks this is the way media should be handled. Yeah, I'm fine with all that. I just don't see an enforcement mechanism or making it a hard and fast rule.
Well, in some cases, the word is the iron that carries it. And out of respect for each other and for the village itself, you use caution when you approach these things. And one way to just have a gut check is to say, I think I'll go, the rule is to go to the village office and bring this thought forward. And then it's not just me going off on my own, deciding I'm going to promote some idea using my title, even if it's a good idea. I think it's a gut check to take it through the village.
I'm okay with all of that, everything you said. I'm okay with it. So
you
We
go.
can have a media policy that says these are guidelines for dealing with media. Maybe we should even have media training. I don't know.
Well,
but-
first thing is don't
Separate
grant the
issue.
interview.
Separate issue.
So something I have to say right now is Finance Committee is moving to 5:30, and we're going to try to wrap this in the next 20 minutes.
But Mr. Mayor, like you pointed out, it could be a guideline, but it's not enforceable.
Correct.
So it's a
There's nothing that
courtesy.
we,
No,
I
it's
mean,
a
we're not going to
courtesy.
throw somebody off of council
Right.
for violating the policy.
And I don't think any of us,
I don't know. It depends on what they take. Okay.
I
I
don't
can think
think,
of a few circumstances where I would throw someone off of council if they went to the media with a certain idea.
Well, but
Anyway.
ultimately, it's the voters who throw people off council.
That's
So if they are, if they do, if somebody does something that really is bad for the village, and everybody agrees it's bad for the village, or a majority agree it's bad for the village, then yeah, that person is going to be
unless
elected.
it becomes incumbent upon the current council to act to remove that person. And I think that possibility exists too. Don't need to do it now, but reserve it for the future if it's necessary.
I have one last point.
Yes,
I
please.
promise you I'll
All right.
stop this. I don't think any of us wishes that we needed to add a Rule 9A on
No.
this.
No.
I don't think any of us wanted that. But I think it's absolutely critical that we have these guidelines down, and I am confident Ms. Ryan is going to have something for us, what, Kathy, a week?
Yeah.
Great.
But may I suggest that we consider it as, it might just be a new rule of council completely, Rule 41.
Okay,
We have 40
okay.
rules. This would be on communications policy.
Okay.
Or so communication standards, something along those lines. It would include probably our email and newsletter policies too, that as has been pointed out, they could use some clarification. And so I don't think we're ready to tackle them right now. And it's basically a separate document. But it's something to look at.
Well, a media policy could be, I'm sorry, I had to take the mask off. One of the things broke. Media policy, a communications policy, and again, we can't form it here, but we're going to endeavor to form both of those things. Also, this idea of a disclaimer, it sounds like everyone is concerned about the use of title, when it's appropriate to use title. It sounds like disclaimer could be an acceptable way to make sure that we don't have, that we clear this concept of whether or not it's a village opinion or a personal opinion. Now, I think the way I'd like to see that rule written, and I don't want to get into a bunch of discussion, is that in general, you just don't use your title unless you're working on governmental business. It's very simple to act as a resident. Everybody knows who you are. And everybody knows whether or not you serve on council or what you do. Again, to me, that's respect for the office, and it's respect for everyone else who's putting in their time to help govern the village. But in the event that someone feels it's necessary to use their title, then you use the disclaimer. I think it can be written that way. That in general, we prefer not. If you're not acting as, in your capacity as a village official, in the event that someone feels like they need to, then there's a disclaimer. But that disclaimer needs to be front and center. It can't be fine print at the back of a document that nobody sees.
Okay, I agree
You
with
have to
that.
keep clarity.
I'm wondering if there's one thing that I said before is that we will need to define what governmental business is. Because to me, it is always appropriate for a member of the government to comment on government business, at least an elected representative to comment on business that's pending before that body. So we will need to say, when does something become governmental business, and when is it just maybe a gleam in somebody's eye that they would like to make it governmental business?
You mean local, Don? You mean Mayor? You mean local government business or regional or federal?
No, I'm talking about Glendale.
Okay.
I'm not Glendale business. I'm sorry. You're good catch. We are just concerned about somebody commenting on Glendale governmental business. And and that's kind of like to me, a very clear, safe area to comment. And then if it's not yet governmental business, but they would like it to be, then we have to figure out how we're going to handle that.
Mhm. Okay, that's, and I can relate to that. I won't make any further comments in that area. So it's that communication using the title, and then the communication through the village email. We talked about a media policy, communication policy, but through the village newsletter and the village email, I think we have already demonstrated through our own practice what I would agree with in terms of what goes in the newsletter and what goes out in official village communication. What I have seen is the results of legislation, the announcements for bake sales and pancake breakfast, and it's all things that generally are important business or news for the village, and it's open to everyone. Everyone can benefit from whatever these announcements are. And there's even the example that someone could try to parse where it's, this restaurant has been closed for 2 years, now it's going to have a grand reopening. Is that really important village business or not? Well, it benefits everyone in the village, and it could help a local restaurant, so that's good. Here's another example that's been used that could be a guidepost. The Presbyterian Church advertised or promoted in the village newsletter a choir concert at Christmas time where all were invited to attend and come and sing carols, and a pancake breakfast and a golf outing. Everyone's allowed to participate. Similar to fill the square with food that's been done by the police chief and the Presbyterian Church and others. The Presbyterian Church then made a request at one point that they would like to put in the village newsletter that because of COVID, they were changing their service schedule and it was moving outside. And they were told, don't they have a bulletin to take care of that? This is a small group. It's kind of at that point, it's your own church. It's more of a private issue. And so it's not of general benefit to the village. So it's not necessary to put that in. You can communicate that through your own. So those are some good guideposts that I see. I would exclude from that a private meeting among citizens who want to talk about gun rights, Alan Holweller, or about more trees in Glendale, Councilman Bessel, or what have you. I would exclude from that unless it's a meeting that is open to the entire public. So I think we have some good guideposts there. Whether or not we need to clean anything up, we've got some rules written, but that's one more thing we need to look at to clear up. Please go ahead.
Mike, I do think, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Mike Burnham reminded me in 2010 or 11, he was in charge of the Glendale Tea Party, and it was open to everyone. It was in the village square on a Friday night, and they could not put that in that the previous Friday night's village emails.
Why did
that was denied.
Why did they not?
I think they looked at it as a political event. But the Unity March a few weeks ago was put in. Okay. That was mentioned in the Friday night email. So Kathy, I think we need to figure out what's important governmental notice, what's a political event, what's a community event. I think we really need to tighten that language.
Okay, all right.
And a community service.
A community service.
I'm pretty sure it's only a matter of time before the Burwinkle farm truck issue pops up here.
Yeah.
I know it's only a and
that's a community service.
But it is a community service. We announced it once, but it was not announced as a project over the name of Councilwoman Masenko. That it was released by.
And I think that would help too. That would help too. If it is something that's open to all, and it's not an individual person that it's announced by, it's announced by a group or by the village.
Well,
I think that's
Burwinkle it's a business, and I don't believe it's a nonprofit, is it?
Right. No.
No. So normally what we do is we give them one opening announcement in the newsletter. And then after that, there might be some very big deal or something where normally it would be something that is not promoting their business. So if Burwinkle promoted a golf outing for charity, they might, we might run that.
Okay.
So there are things we have to do with our newsletter policies. We have to look at the words that Mrs. Rogers, noted, and I think quite rightly so. Other helpful governmental information.
What does that mean while we're on it? Because I was going to get to that.
I mean, I think it's a very broad phrase that can mean, for governmental information, it could mean a lot of things. So I think that might be something someplace where we should tighten things up. And I would invite that up.
Wasn't it the year we had like 12 inches of snow? They said to get your car off of Congress or.
That's helpful information.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the plow's going to hit it.
Yep.
Or it'll get buried. Yeah.
So
I would invite our solicitor to perhaps look at some of the other policies she's aware of and see if there's some better language than what we've got now. I'm open to hearing it.
Mr. Mayor, so along the communication element is also the village owns basically a lot of email addresses and also owns all the addresses of all the residents in Glendale. What is the proper use of distribution of that list to anyone?
Probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that should probably be a policy.
David has a comment. Yeah.
Village nonprofits. Yeah.
So we need to be very clear on the why one, not another.
The only information that the utility billing register information is used for is for the Glendale directory. Residents, every time they register to join, or rather come to the village, they move to the village, they fill out a utility registration form, at which point they're given the opportunity to opt out of being included in that directory. We make note of those accounts. We don't provide that information when the directory is prepared. Otherwise, that information is, I think there's maybe one or two other instances where nonprofit groups get that information, or other instruments of the village. For instance, the park board gets that kind of information. The email addresses, we use a vendor by the name of MailChimp to produce those email newsletters. They keep that information secure. There's no risk of those addresses being shared. That information is only for the newsletter. Those email addresses aren't put out publicly in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, thank you.
This is Kathy Ryan. If I could chime in on that matter as well, to the extent that there are any email lists that end up within the village records, an email that's on a otherwise public record, and it's there for a purpose aside from something that's relevant to village business. For example, if someone submits like a job application, sure, their name is relevant to that, but not their personally identifiable information. So the way the public records law is written, an email of that nature in pretty much all the types of email lists I could think of that we're talking about, it falls under that middle category of records where it's not one that's prohibited from disclosure, but it's also not required to be disclosed. So to the extent that the village feels strongly that emails in that way need to uniformly be withheld and redacted from otherwise public records, that can be a policy where it fills in the gray area within the records law. Now, it doesn't have to be, but it's just something to think about because there is opportunity there to kind of tighten your policy to the extent you feel you need to.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Are there any other comments?
I would just like to invite our solicitor to, if I believe she said there were some other media policies, others had media policies, that if you can find a good one, that'd be a template for us. We'd like to see it.
Sure.
Okay.
Is there any way that, I'm going to ask David this question. The village newsletter goes out on Friday. Is there any way we could get a pre-released copy of it so we can
Like a
kind of read it and and be ahead of the curve.
It's prepared really up until the hour that it's sent. Sometimes things get in, especially council materials pre-meeting can come in pretty much at the last minute. We keep a running list of what goes into the newsletter. So something like that might be available.
Okay, let me say as mayor, yes, we can get an advanced copy to you. It may not be perfect. It may not be exactly what goes out at 5 o'clock if late announcements come into us. But yeah, I think we should have a policy of getting something out by 2 o'clock in the afternoon?
That's fine.
Okay.
Just give us enough time to read it before.
Yeah.
But just to make sure, you're not suggesting this early release would be for editorial purposes, for
No.
proofing?
No.
Okay.
No, this is a heads up.
It's
This
not-
is coming.
But if I have a committee report and I put it in the newsletter, I'd like to see what's going into the newsletter before it goes into the newsletter. If my committee, and my minutes or whatever, say it happens that there's something in our committees that affects the village, I would hope that your committee would see it before it goes into the newsletter.
Yeah, we can do
Okay.
that.
That's all I'm saying. And then,
Right.
and then if you have a question about it, maybe, David can use his judgment and say, okay, we'll hold off on this until next week.
Yeah.
So,
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't
no, I'm not saying good.
let's be
Absolutely
the editors
not.
on this.
We'll
Okay.
end up with groupthink. That's trouble. Any other comments from anybody? Okay. So what I'm hearing is we would like, as a village body, we're going to work on a media policy, work on a communications policy, and that communication policy will involve when to use and not use title, and the idea of disclaimer. A newsletter policy, which we already have, but we're going to firm that up.
Especially as it relates to what constitutes village business,
Yes,
right?
correct. And we want definition of other helpful government information. Maybe we need to either further define or just drop that so that we don't have the mystery hanging over. And then Ms. Ryan brought up the idea of how you handle addresses, email lists. I guess phone numbers could fall into that as well. So tighten that up as necessary. And then we're talking about potentially a pre-release of the newsletter to council people so they know what will be in it. Is there anything else that we want to follow up with? I think these are good action items and good directives. This is what we're going to work on. Is there anything else that we want to work on? Let's go back to the agenda and see if we hit it all. Use of titles, we did. Village communications, we did. Council review of village email guidelines, we did. So we are going to endeavor to work on these things. I think we can have something by next council meeting. So we'll target that next full council. Change of name of laws, claims, miscellaneous committee to laws, claims committee. Don, you might explain why we want to do this. I think it's a good idea.
Okay. I've always felt that that title was odd and just because it's effectively then everything. You could argue that, well, maybe there should be one committee that is assigned to take on the responsibilities that don't fit within the jurisdiction of any other committee. I don't agree with that. I think when an oddball comes in to us, then it should be assigned by the mayor and council to either an appropriate committee, a committee of their choice, or a special committee. And I don't think just having the miscellaneous handle there is really good practice. So that is, I think the name should be just shortened.
I agree. It could be because an issue that's an oddball could be more of a financial, it could be more of a building. It could actually fall to police. When we think it belongs somewhere else, it might actually fall to police. We had that one happen recently. So is there a motion to go ahead and adopt that change?
So
Okay, it's a recommendation now because this is a committee.
That's
So
true.
it's going to make a
So is
recommendation
a
to council.
recommendation, can we have a recommendation to council to make this change?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we will propose that to council for a vote. I
Can we,
was going to ask,
Pardon me.
are there any more?
yeah, I'm sorry.
Sure.
And this is somewhat related, terribly related. Under Rule 9, committee responsibilities, committee shall follow council direction in matters referred to it.
Yes.
By whom? By council, by the mayor?
I think in general, what happens is, sorry, I'm the leader of the committee right now.
Sorry.
It's the by whom I'm.
Yeah, and you gotta, if you give me the microphone, I won't give it back. That's the problem.
Now we know.
Now we know. So this is what I have seen. I think this is what works. A lot of times there will be things that will be referred to committee by council
Right.
and just of general importance. And that's the way I normally see it happening. And also from the mayor to a given committee.
Right.
And then we also have the situation like with the quiet zone, which turned out very well, where the mayor created a committee. Now that's a special committee that's being created, similar to what we're conducting now with this. So I think in general, that is accurate. That works at the direction of council.
Well,
So
would it be wise to clarify that? Follow council direction, I guess.
right. So in what circumstance is there something that comes before a committee in a committee discussion? And then the committee looks at it and makes a recommendation to council to take it up. And then once council takes that up, they give it back to committee and say, work on this and bring us the solutions. I think it all either feeds up into council, back down, and then back, or it starts with council, goes to committee, and then comes back. Or starts with mayor, goes to committee, and comes back.
Often as not, I mean, most of the matters that go to committees tend to originate at the administrative level. The mayor or the administrator comes up with an idea and then says, we ought to, this ordinance ought to be considered by the appropriate committee, and then we generally give it to them.
Sure. And when I say mayor, I mean administration. It kind of starts there at that office. So,
but I think it is the mayor that does the assignment out of the, from the central.
Maybe that does need.
Well, it does, because I
to
think
be identify the mayor also.
Yeah, if I wanted my committee to look into buying all new yellow fire trucks, I don't know. Could I do that? I mean, it doesn't limit the freelancing issue here. That's my concern. Because I could be a freelance. I could be freelancing all over.
And that is the question as to how council feels about that. Because, you're absolutely right. At least within its own jurisdiction, there's a history of occasionally committees, not often, but occasionally they come up with an idea. They talk about it. Maybe the next they have the solicitor or someone draft an ordinance for them, and then they bring that to council with a recommendation for it.
Is that appropriate?
Would people prefer that under those circumstances the committee first go to council and say, we've got this idea, and now will you let us take it on?
I've seen circumstances where committee will recommend to council. Mostly it starts with administrative or mayor or with council, and where council says we need to do this, let's give it to committee X, Y, or Z. They do the work and then they bring it back. That's typically where things.
I think that clarity needs to be in the rules as well.
Okay.
Kathy, is that insane?
Sorry
Yes.
about that. I was on mute. No, that would make a lot of sense. I think that clarity should be there. Obviously, the mayor and his administration has its own independent role and scope of responsibility within the village, and there are functions by which he will bring something to a committee that are going to be kind of independent from those of the council. So it's good to make sure all of those are encompassed in that.
Okay,
Okay, so
so add to that
Clarify that,
direction
yeah.
of mayor or whatever we need to do.
council or mayor.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I think you're limiting the power of the committee also. I mean, the mayor appoints the committee members. So the committee has a duty to say, within this committee, I think we have an idea that we would like to do this. So if the 3 members of the committee vote for, I think it's a great idea, now we want to bring it towards council. So that council will adopt it.
Sure.
So I think we shouldn't limit the power of the committee to bring ideas to council to enact those ideas. Otherwise, council is just, just kind of a puppet system. I mean, the committee, I think, should have enough independence to come up with other ideas that they view is of significant importance to the village. Then council can agree or not support that idea.
As a practical matter, it hasn't been a major problem because I and the mayor before me that I knew attended most of the committee meetings. So you're there when a new idea comes forward, and you're certainly in a position to, if you want to, say, I don't think that's appropriate for this committee. I don't think it's appropriate for this issue to even go to council. I mean, I've never seen that happen, but I suppose it could. So, but otherwise, there would be a de facto consent by the mayor, by his presence, to letting this issue go forward in the committee and then make its way up to council. I don't think it's been a real problem to date.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So it may need some clarification, but I kind of agree with not upsetting that current system. Okay. Are there any other comments? Okay. Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Hand these out. I'll give these to Don because he's still got a mask on. That should be enough.
Is this the same one?
Same. The only change is I put a date on it. So what Don is handing out now is a draft, a very rough draft, and a first look at our mid-year, year-to-date comparison versus budget. And there are a couple of things that need to be explained there. And then a quick look at a 2021 budget that is, in its form right now is very rough. But it's just meant to give a general overview of what next year might look like. And then a sort of a rough peek into the future so that we can at least be somewhat cognizant of what revenues and expenses are going to do over the next couple of years and be prepared for that. So you've seen this before, but it's something we look at mostly in the fall in the budgeting season. Just to give a quick overview of what is here is this is the general fund. It shows our revenue and just kind of look at where it says budget 2020. It shows our budgeted revenue, which is property tax with a rollback, other revenue, and then a total revenue number. And then it shows expenditures. And the way we've broken out expenditures and trying to do it from a 10,000 foot view and not get into the weeds. We do that at the individual committee level every year. But to look at overall expenditures, compensation is a big one. Healthcare broken out separate because a typical increase for healthcare, we don't have a lot of control over that. Workers' comp kind of moves at its own rate of increase. The garbage contract is fixed at a 3%. Our insurance contract is typically 3%. And then other expenses, and those are some of the road expenses, some of the smaller capital item expenses, things that can't be identified as either compensation or compensation related items, or the garbage contract or the insurance. We assign what we think is a typical escalation factor for all those things. And that's what you see in the next column next to the, the verbiage. And then we show then our budget of 2020. And then based on that current budget, we apply those escalation factors and we come up with the 2021 budget. Our year-to-date through July 31, and we are on a calendar year, if you just look at revenue, you'll see actual year-to-date, that's YTD, 7/31/2020, 1,430,000. We only have half our revenue. The other half comes in August. This was booked as of the end of July. Our expenses is pretty much 7 months worth. Some things are a little bit front-loaded, some things are a little bit back-loaded, but that's kind of an average. You go down then to the net number. If it's in brackets, it's a negative. It shows 242,000. Does everybody see that? Negative 242. Okay. So how did that happen? We thought our budget said 64,000 negative. So 2 points. Start with a 64,000 negative. When we wrote the budget, we thought that the UDF tax revenue would come in this year, and it's in arrears. So our mistake. We also thought UDF was coming online sooner. They didn't really come online until the spring. We won't see revenue from that until the first half of 2021. They'll pay for their 2020 time in that building in 2021. That is anticipated to be something in the neighborhood of $30,000. Our actual negative under that circumstance then would be negative 34,000. When we built the budget last year, we loaded a contingency in that made it go negative 34,000, roughly a 25K contingency. But that's why we're negative 64. Now, why are we showing for year to date negative 242? We have 7 months of expense, but only 6 months of revenue because it comes in 2 big chunks, and this is actual. So if your revenue expected is 2,523,000 each month, then that equates to 210. And we're missing a month in this snapshot. We have through June, but our expenses are through July because we don't get our revenue until August.
Begging your pardon, Mr. Chairman, but don't we have more than that coming in? Because we get our property tax in 2 big chunks.
2 big chunks.
And the next big chunk is going to be in August.
Correct.
It was in August.
Well, I'm breaking it down to a month to month. So if you were looking at 7 months and it came in evenly each month.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
So why are we negative 242 right now? Well, you're missing 1 month of revenue, 210,000. So you'd actually be only negative 32,000. That's pretty close to the projected 34,000 negative that we did project with the UDF, assuming UDF was coming in. So I don't have a lot of concern about where we are currently. I think we're going to make budget. When I look at this, we might be slightly ahead. So that's not too bad. Our 2021 budget, however, shows a negative 114. So that's revenue increased only 0.5%. Why 1/2? Over the last 10 years, our revenue has gone up about 0.5% every year. Sometimes you get a little bit better, but that's about it. It comes from new houses being built, a new store coming online, or occasionally when the auditor reassesses property. But that's about an average. Our expenses increased per the estimated escalation for each of these categories. And we actually used for healthcare 9% because that's the real increase. So that's a 9% bump, which is what we will experience. It's average 6. So we'll use the 6% on the out years beyond 2021, but we use 9% to capture that whole thing. So we get down to a negative 114. How do we fix that? We'll have to look at our expenses. I don't know how we can increase revenue without bringing more property taxes in or increasing a levy. I think, in my mind, there's no need to do that for this year. The reason for that, there will be some administrative changes in the coming year in our administrative office. And we anticipate being able to save somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000, possibly $80,000. If we can realize an $80,000 savings against 114 loss, again, we'd be at a 34,000 negative, which was acceptable, and I think kind of still is. Going out forward, we will realize some amount of savings, but when we get to our next levy year, which would be 2023, we will likely need to do the additional levy. I know that confuses people. An increased levy, you lose the rollback. If you just do an additional levy, you preserve your rollback. The rollback's worth $180,000 maybe. So we want to preserve that if we can. So looking at just a real rough cut at our year to date, I think we're going to hit our budget and be okay. Looking at the 2021 year and the potential budget for that year, again, I think we'll be okay. We'll have to carefully look at expenses and make sure we stay tight on all those things. So are there any questions about budget at the moment?
What is the effect, Mike, if the levy renewal does not succeed?
That's half roughly of our revenue. And if our levy does not succeed, then we are looking at major changes to our expense items. That sort of loss in revenue would represent us having to, say, cut a police department.
The entire police department.
Police department. It would be grave consequences for our village if we don't pass that levy. We've had this same levy for these same two levies for a number of years that come about every other year, or is it they're on a 4-year rotation.
Well,
So
the
every other
levies
year,
are 4-year,
they're
but there are
4-year
2
levy.
of them, and
4 years.
they are staggered.
They're
So
staggered.
Every 2 years, we have a levy.
It's been a long time, I think, since this village has not been able to pass a levy. I would hope that our villagers would be inclined to go ahead and pass this one so we can maintain our village.
I would certainly hope so.
The consequences would be dire, obviously. Any other questions?
Mike, for the end of projected out, you still think we're hitting about a 65,000 deficit? You still think that looks realistic for the end of this year?
I don't think it'll be that much. I don't think it'll be 65,000.
Okay.
No. No, I think it'll be more like the 30. Again, we didn't receive our UDF, but we've been tight on a lot of these expenses. People have been helping to control costs, and I think we're going to be all right.
Okay. And you show UDF in 2021 on the top line?
David, was that put in there or not? I think it's not.
If the budget 2020 was assuming UDF was going to be received under property tax, then the budget 2021 is 0.5% of that budget 2020 number.
Yeah, 2020 has UDF in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Short
that
answer
would,
is yes,
that would
it
be the
is reflected.
2021 then.
It is. Okay.
Any other questions about the budget? No. With regard to our capital spending, we haven't studied that yet. Our treasurer has indicated to us that our revenues from our invested funds will be declining. For a while, a few years ago, we were enjoying interest rates close to 5%. And typical interest rates of 3.5%. Interest rates now on a 5-year instrument is less than 1%. We have a bond ladder. We've taken advantage of those higher rates long-term when we purchased those instruments. Now we are just staying with shorter-term instruments because we don't want to lock into a 5-year at a 0.5% interest rate. But what that means in general is that we will have less revenue coming in. We'll have tough decisions to make because we really don't want to invade our principal amount, but we will get into that more in the budget process. I think there are some areas where we can trim and be careful about what we spend. And then Mr. Bogran just needs to be able to go out and figure out where to plant that next money tree to yield more leaves.
Buy gold. At least today.
Yeah. I don't think we're allowed to buy gold.
No, we're not. Yesterday.
Greek bonds.
Yeah. Any other questions about finance?
When do you want us to begin our budget with the committees?
That I think can wait until the October timeframe, which is on us. Let's think about this. It would be good if by our November meeting, council meeting, that we have.
Did you say?
It would be good if by our November council meeting, we're able to have our ducks in a line on that subject, so we know what we're getting into for the coming year. Now, that requires us to estimate some of the last 2 months of expense, but by October, we've got a good handle on what's going to still get spent and what's not.
I will say this, usually, in fact, always, the administration puts out a schedule for, first of all, the departments to build their budgets and then to take them to committee. And the committee looks at the budgets and decides how they feel about it. And then they all go into so it's going to be a process, and there will be an announcement coming out about the schedule.
Very good.
And to council members in the audience, I mean, we do have a 2021 budget that's already submitted to the state. I mean, it's our estimated budget. So this final act really just finalizes the budget, and then we'll submit the final budget early next year.
Okay, correct. Okay. Don, did you want to talk about communication regarding the upcoming levy that is only a renewal? It is not an increase. It's just a renewal of our current levy.
I thought I did. I think it's somewhat been teed up right now. I think probably the responsibility should fall upon perhaps Mr. Bogran and Mr. Bessel and myself to try to come up with some communication materials. We are not, as you know, allowed to advocate for a levy. We are, however, allowed to provide information to residents about the need, how the levy would be spent. And so that's the delicate line that we do have to walk. And I think we'd like to get something in, perhaps at the next council meeting, maybe the next council meeting, maybe the next finance committee meeting, of some documents that we might want to put out to inform our residents about the levy. That's
Okay.
that's all I really need to say on it.
Very good. Again, the levy will be a renewal. It is not an increase.
It will be on the ballot in November.
It will be on the ballot in November, and I think almost all of our department heads and the village administration is keenly aware that they need to help control costs. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn from the finance?
So moved.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you, Mike.